Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von Beek. So I recently decided to get to know Neil Young's music a bit better by listening to his actual studio albums. So I've already made a video on album number 1, and I've just listened to albums 2, 3, and 4. And these are all pretty big albums in the history of Neil Young. His career got off to a pretty big start. And now I'm going to talk about that album number 2. Everybody knows This Is Nowhere. I can only show you the back because library copy, and again, someone lost the insert. But my previous experience of Neil Young was largely through a live album my parents had. It was a 1971 album called Live at Massey Hall. And luckily, the content of this album largely consists of stuff that Neil Young did on albums 2, 3, and 4. So I got to recognize a lot of what I heard on these albums. Also some stuff like Ohio that he did with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And there was a song, Dance, 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 he wrote for his backing band, Crazy Horse, that they recorded on their non-Neil Young album. But what I'm really grateful for with this experience is sometimes you feel like you don't need both the live album and the studio album because it's the same song. You listen to one, you have the same experience. But this is the most clear-cut case where no, to appreciate Neil Young as an artist, you really need to listen to the studio versions of a bunch of these songs and the live versions because they bring something very different to the table. So what defines Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, the second album by Neil Young? Well, the main thing is that he's trying to make a sound more electric, more rock and roll. His first album, simply titled Neil Young, was kind of awkward and kind of intriguing. Neil Young wanted to take that awkwardness out and give something more cool, give something more in your face. So he formed a band, called it Crazy Horse, and they opened their album, this next album, with a song that is straight up rock and roll. It's a tune called Cinnamon Girl. You know, if you know Neil Young, you definitely know this song. And the song marks a real evolution in Neil Young's sound from the lonelier, broodier, more folk stuff on his first record. Yet while this change is dramatic, it's not absolute. Firstly, there's a clear juxtaposition. Sure, it has the edge of electric rock and roll, but it still has that sweetness of that adjective cinnamon, unless you're thinking of like unsweetened cinnamon and the cinnamon challenge and that it's a pure rough song, but clearly that's not what it is. That said, the real shocker for me listening to this album, again, having heard a lot of these songs before, were the murder ballad Down by the River and Cowgirl in the Sound, which is a song seemingly about the Madonna whore complex and learning to overcome it in one's male thoughts. So I had heard these songs on the Live at Massey Hall album. They were acoustic folk songs, and they were about 4 minutes in length each. They were fairly normal folk songs, albeit with memorable lyrics. Therefore, when you listen to them on the Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere album, they come as a total surprise, despite their familiarity. And that's because between each verse of these songs, Crazy Horse has these ridiculously long, jammy guitar solos, and it totally changes the character of these songs. It makes them more than twice as long. And the observation I had to make when listening to these is, so this album's from 1969, and by now with Bob Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel and others, the genre of folk rock was more than well established. But this mix of singer-songwritery, Bob Dylan-esque lyrics with electric guitars, it's not folk rock, it's folk and rock. You get a verse of folk, and then you get a long rock solo. It's like nothing out there. Now, musically, I don't know if this creates pure enjoyment. It's kind of a weird tactic that sort of takes the wind out of the sails of what otherwise might be quite intense or shocking lyrics. So on Neil Young's first record, he had this real shyness to him, and it manifested into him also often suppressing his voice in the mix, letting it be drowned out by the guitars and violins and other instruments. On this album, the vocals are crisp and clean. He's not suppressing them when he is singing. I guess he's not being shy about his literal voice, but he is being shy about himself as a speaker by speaking and then running away and letting the guitar solos do the talking. The title track to this album is also an interesting new take on the Neil Young we'd seen before. So on that first album, Neil Young tried to cultivate this mysterious identity that on the one hand was emphatically not a city person, but it wasn't a straightforward, proud, redneck, country twangy thing kind of either, as he clearly rejects that identity as seen by his song Southern Man. So what kind of identity, urban, rural, or something else, is Neil Young cultivating? Well, on the one hand, in the song, Everybody Knows That This Is Nowhere, he sings, I'd like to go back home and take it easy. So he wants to leave the city, go back to the country, take it easy. Sounds kind of Huck Finn, sounds kind of standard country stuff. But he also sings, Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. That's not being proud of the country. That's not being proud of escaping the city. So what he's saying is that he wants to escape, presumably to the countryside, suggested by the song's country stylings, as by the album cover, but he doesn't necessarily, he's not proud of the country. He's saying, I guess I want to escape into nowhere, into nothing, or just not feel strong feelings about any place at all. So in short, this album is an example of how you can take the familiar and make it different. There's also an element of circularity to it. You know, there's even this song called Round and Round We Spin. If Neil Young's first album was about being a loner, Everybody Knows It's Nowhere is about someone who has overcome being the loner and then ends up in the same lonely situation again. The other two songs I haven't talked about, The Losing End and Running Dry, speak from the perspective of someone who was loved and lost rather than someone who simply never loved. And by having Cowgirl in the Sand as the concluding track to the album, Neil Young allows this journey or circular non-journey to end kind of ambiguously. The lyrics to Cowgirl in the Sand could be interpreted as the hero having learned confidence, a sort of obnoxious confidence that he's able to talk so boldly to these various women characters. But it could also be that he's tepid as ever, as judged by the song's long solos. He steps forward and makes a statement, and then backs away. So who is the Neil Young on Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere? Is he proud of the parts of him that have grown up in the country, or is he dismissing the country as nowhere? Is he more bold and more able to find love, or is he shy and hopeless? The album relishes that ambiguity, and quite literally, for better or for worse, it relishes the rock stylings of Crazy Horse. So let me know, are the long guitar solos on this album a bit too weird for you, or does it largely work? Do you prefer these versions of those songs, or do you prefer the folk versions from the Live at Massey Hall album? I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.